Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast, an ongoing series of conversations and considerations to help people understand and embrace their own unique creativity for fulfilling lives and brilliant careers. My name is Ben Talon, I'm an illustrator and author, and I bring 16 years of creative industry experience working with the New York Times, The Guardian, the Premier League and more. And I invite designers, artists, psychologists, scientists, coaches, athletes, sensitivity experts and all kinds of thought leaders to help us broaden our knowledge of creativity. Creativity is a fundamental pillar of human happiness, a vital ingredient in the solutions to our problems, but so often misunderstood. The show is supported by founding sponsor and B Corp, Illustration X. Take a look at their stunning range of illustrators and animators at illustrationx.com. If you like the music for the show, it's by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on Spotify and all good music streaming services.
And that character came from all those freaky Easter Bunny photographs from the past, the 1940s onwards. You know the ones?
I do know the ones, yeah.
God knows who was making the mask in the local village. But the things are terrifying, and there's a whole bunch of them where the kids are screaming in terror, and it kind of like looks like a kind of like a serial killer in a rabbit mask.
Today I'm joined by Stephen Bliss, who returns to the show for the first time in 6 or 7 years after our first conversation in Brooklyn. Back then Stephen was working on I, Frankenstein not too long after leaving his role at Rockstar Games, where he created the iconic artworks for Grand Theft Auto video games. But now we're getting into an even darker place. Thumper, the comic, comes out this week on Scout Comics. It's a belter. It's a part of his bigger Fierce City environment, a world that he's been creating through NFTs and physical artwork. We're going to get into all of it and everything else that he's been up to in the meantime. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're well. My name is Ben Talon. I am your host, as ever, for this podcast. I thank you for coming back every week to chat with me. It means a lot. If you're a regular, please do leave a little subscription, a review, a rating, whatever you got time for. It really helps the show, and a massive thank you to those who it wouldn't be possible to do it without. Illustration X, founding sponsor, representing many global illustrators and animators, and you can see all of their portfolios on their website at illustrationx.com. You can also check out their Trend X report, agents reporting from the front line of the illustration game to see what's hot. Whether you want to reject it, follow it, is kind of irrelevant, but it's information that only those guys can bring us in its truest form, so check them out now. Also, a huge thank you to the Ukrainian Institute for their ongoing important work supporting the Ukrainian community, creative community, at such a time of hardship and fear. So go and have a look. If you can help those guys out by supporting the Ukrainian creative community, then please do. I think that would be awesome and very kind of you. So welcome back. How are you doing? What did you think of last week's double hit, Olympic-themed double hit, with Alex Pask Judicar sharing information and insights on flow states in fight sports, which had so many correlations to artistic practice. I hope you enjoyed that one. And then I followed it up with a highlights edition of episode 152, going back a little bit, with Ben Ryan, Olympic gold medal winning coach, coaching Fiji Rugby Sevens to gold at the 2016 Olympics. Is one of my favourite ever conversations in my life. I wanted to give you another hit of it, this time shorter, snappier. What did you think? What did you think of the first one? Have you listened to the full length one? If you haven't, you really should. I was a little gutted to see Fiji surrender their gold with a chance of a hat-trick and come away with just silver at the hands of France, the host nation, on Saturday. And my kids got quite invested with me, going, who do we want to win again? I was trying to explain why I'd got this little vested interest in Fiji, but it wasn't to be this time. So congrats to France, and I hope you guys have been enjoying the Olympics. I just find sports so inspiring. I always have. And as you'll know, I'm a big advocate of physical activity for mental health, looking after the body as one, including the brain, for optimal creativity. It's something I'm featuring and factoring into the framework of my coaching model, which is still in development but coming very, very soon. I got my first booking for that. I'm going to be working with D&AD for their academy, provided my creative condition session. So look forward to that. I'm very excited to do it. So give us a shout if it's anything that I can help you guys with. What else? So Stephen and I talked not too long after he'd left Rockstar. This was going back to, I think, 2015. I might be wrong. I had a few consecutive visits in those years around 2014 through 18 to the 19 even to the States right before the pandemic. And I went round to Stephen's flat on one of those and saw some of his I, Frankenstein collage artworks, which we discussed today. They were in his flat. They were amazing. I loved that conversation. So go back to episode 70 if you want the original conversation back then. Today we're talking Fear City, the world that Stephen has created. It's incredible. It's dripping with darkness and I love it. It's making me want to play some part in it. So Stephen and I are having a conversation about doing a few trial creative writing pieces. Whether it happens, whether it goes anywhere, that's kind of by the by. It's just something that I think would be at least worth having a play with, a little mini collaboration. So we'll see what happens there. But the comic is out this week on Scout Comics. It's not just Stephen. Stephen has created the cover art and worked on the writing of the project. He's writing alongside Malcolm Wong, who he worked with as in illustration agent, I believe. And there's also artwork within the comic created by the wonderful Alessia DeCio. So check her out on Instagram. I think it's bits_n_bones, her handle. But really cool work. Very excited to get my hands on this one and see what's going on in this world. You can very much see the genesis of the Grand Theft Auto stuff in there if you played those games, if you still continue to play those games. I know Stephen doesn't work on the artwork now, like he left Rockstar back during our first conversation, but his work will remain iconic forevermore, and you can see his natural style throughout all this work. So we're going to talk about that at length today. Give us a shout, hello@bentalon.com, or on social. I'm on LinkedIn primarily and Instagram these days, but email is the best way to get me. It's the quickest response you'll get, so hello@bentalon.com. Like I said, please do leave us a review, a rating, or a subscription. The book is out now, bentalonwriter.com/shop. You can get both Champagne and Wax Crayons, my first book about turning creativity into a career, a very warts and all black humour memoir of the life of an illustrator/artist, finding my feet in this crazy world that I've inhabited now for 17 years. A lot more if you include my education, quarter of a century actually. That's quite scary. You can get the Kindle version now on Kindle Store. Also, audiobook will be coming one day. Anyway, big thank you to Stephen Bliss for taking the time for this chat. Enjoy.
I mean, I grew up with, my dad was in the Navy, and he would come back from the Navy and he would kind of rule the house like it was a ship. And we were kind of like discipline. And I've always believed that set me up for hardcore work, focus that I've always been into. And I don't know if at this point of my life, whether it's been very healthy, but I've always been very disciplined about my work. The discipline I want to get into at the moment is to keep up the work, but also discipline myself to look after my mental state and my body, and kind of like become more of a rounded person. Because the way I've been working through the pandemic, since I left Rockstar, or even before at Rockstar and before Rockstar, it's always been everything is about work and creating.
I think that's the thing, and I think that the mistake there is generally is to equate the discipline to just productivity, because what I'm learning is that I struggle with, and I think this is really common, but I struggle with disciplining myself to rest and to do the things that feed the mind and give you the great ideas in the long run, if you allow them to just stay in the unconscious. Whereas it's so ingrained in our culture, and I guess in your circumstance, especially with that kind of discipline around you, it's almost like the idling is seen as a sin almost, or something not a worthwhile use of time.
Yeah, but I have noticed in the past few years that it's those moments of relaxation or meditation or running in the park, or that's when the ideas will spring into mind. I don't run anymore and I want to get back into it, but I remember, like, if I had a design problem or a story problem or something to do with art, like I couldn't solve the problem. If I run, it would come to me. I don't know what it is, the chemicals or the kind of chilling out or the distraction away from the work. By the end of the run, I would be like, all right, that's what was missing, especially with a bit of meditation afterwards. So I want to go back to that place. Yeah, it's almost like has become a sin to even have lunchtime, you know. But I mean, I worked in Japan, which was, you know, your life is the company, and Rockstar was very much like your life is the company. So I'm kind of in that. I'm habitually like that now, you know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, that was certainly a culture for a long, long time. I think it's slowly starting to change. You know, I hear more and more agencies doing 4-day weeks and recognizing the need for their staff to be engaged in other aspects of their life to get the best out of them in work. But that's very new. It's a very new idea.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sloppy. That's what it is, Ben.
Yeah, it's funny. It's the sort of the most ironic move I could have made as a new twin parent. But I subscribed to Idler magazine.
Oh yeah.
It was almost a mental thing. It was I was introduced to Tom, the editor, who's a really fascinating character, and you know the whole thing is their strapline is slow down, live well, have fun, and it's about recognizing the need for that, for downtime and for other pursuits and stimulus in life. It's not so much about laziness. You know, what you'll find on the comments is just privilege central, and you know,
Right.
and that kind of sentiment. But it's really not that. It's more about, you know, but what are you doing at the weekend for pleasure and all that sort of stuff, rather than work, work, work. And
Right.
but it's very interesting, and it actually helped me out of a slightly tricky mental spot. As in, there's Tom's book is just ways to idle, and you know, there's simple things like that anyone could fit into their day, like sit on a bench for 5 minutes, don't do anything else. You know, it's kind of it's
Yeah.
very meditative ideas, but it's very the way he writes it is very funny, and it's great, and it actually really helped me to get grounded in that way. Yeah, which was
All right.
good.
I need to check that out. I need to get more idle. Hmm.
Yeah, I think like you say, it's funny. I'm well aware, and I tell many people about the benefits of letting the unconscious do its thing, like you mentioned with running. But do I do it myself? No. You
Well, how
know,
many kids do you have?
two and done. We had twins in
Uh,
2020,
that's
and
great. That's all you need.
it's absolutely magic. I mean, I love it so much, but it is very tiring, and it does change the ability to work on, you know, responsive to ideas. You kind of have to be a bit more regimented in when you do the work.
Yeah. Right. Right. I've yet to work out how to be regimented. It's I've always had the attitude to just throw everything at it. You know. I mean, I spent the other day. I could spend 2 days just doing a pair of shoulders. You know, and some biceps.
Mm.
And it'd be like driving me absolutely mental, but it's just never good enough. You know, I don't know how people do it. I guess it's like another 10 years of practice.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, that's another interesting thread. I talked to another guy recently who was a professor in psychology, and he specializes in the OCD area, and he's brought a book out on perfectionism. Very interesting.
Oh yeah.
But you know, yeah, again, it's but then there's so many layers to that idea of perfectionism, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being that sort of protective of getting something right. I think that's really, you know, admirable trait. But like you say, depending where it takes you mentally.
Well, it's not great for deadlines, you know.
Yeah, of
I've never
course.
been very that good with deadlines, but getting better all the time.
When we last spoke, I forget the exact year. I think it might have been 2015, but it was just after you'd done a show, I Frankenstein, with your amazing ripped street poster artworks. Is that still something you're working on, or have you kind of gone headlong now into the Fear City stuff?
I'm not working on that anymore. I found that it was I don't know what it was. It's like if it's a working class thing where art, indulging in art and being an artist and spending every day like ripping up paper that I find in the street on hoardings, and then painting into it as a kind of like a lifestyle, as amazing as that was when there's money in the bank, but it didn't ever register as I should give my life over to convey my soul and my feelings. And you know, it just seemed like an indulgence to me, and it was probably completely the wrong attitude. And I did show in London, solo show in London, LA, and New York. But I don't know. I kind of slowly gave it up. I also like, you know, this is a stupid way to judge it, but if I put it on Instagram, a couple of people would love it and they would see the fine artness and they'd love the fact that was doing something that's artistic as opposed to figurative and cartoony. So you get a couple of people that are like, wow, but then it would get like maybe 20 likes. And again, like judging a piece of work and a career with how many likes you get is ridiculous. But I don't know, back when I was doing that, it was kind of like I wanted it to be I wanted it to be huge, and it just wouldn't get there fast enough despite the shows. So I started opening up more to commercial art and getting commissions, and did a campaign for couple or 3 campaigns for Toyota in Germany, doing advertising campaigns, and Coke. There was a ad campaign that never came out. I did, and just opening myself up to kind of like making money and getting reestablished in the illustration world. And then a guy from a company called Yellowheart phoned me up and said, "Can you do me some NFTs for a guy called Triple X Tenkashian, who was a rapper, 21-year-old rapper who was shot. Incredibly talented artists that would be massive nowadays, but they were reducing. They were going to produce 5 NFTs of his music that he first released on SoundCloud, and they needed the visuals for the 5 covers that people would actually purchase to buy the MP4. So I did 5 kind of Triple X Tenkashian covers, did that as NFTs, and then he said to me, "Why don't you do your own NFT thing?" And at the time, it was, people becoming millionaires from selling a piece of shit, artwork. And I thought, well, I can do shit artwork, so I'm going to make this the best art world in Web3. This is going to be the best art. So I did, started doing 4 characters. Females mainly, because I like painting women more than men, and I did a serial killer, more of a vigilante, a teenager that wears the head of a rabbit called Thumper, and then it was like hundreds and hundreds of traits, hand painted traits I was doing, and I had a team and a budget, and the team were like, "Well, we need an Asian character now," so I started doing an Asian character. Then they're like, "Well, young boys or men, they're the main majority of who's buying NFTs, mainly for PFPs, for their Twitter recognition, the character avatar recognition." And I didn't believe, I know that was the demographic, but I was like, guys will have a female to represent themselves, whatever. So they wanted another guy, and it was like 6 characters, all with 300 traits. So by the time, it took a year to paint all this stuff. So by the time the whole thing was starting to fizzle out, it was a case of something I should have learned from, was like putting in way too much work into something. But it made a lot of money. Most of the money went on expenses to set up the whole business. I mean, setting up an NFT collection is really expensive. Paying influencers to kind of like hype up the brand. And we did a streetwear collection with Jeff Staple, who's a very famous streetwear designer. He does a lot of the best shoes for Nike. What else? We eventually did a NFT comic with like behind the scenes video and 3 tracks by Johnny Smoke, who's a fantastic rap artist. So 3 tracks that he wrote for Fear City. They sound a bit like Rage Against the Machine. So I wanted to keep doing it like that. What must have been one of the first comic NFTs that ever came out. So I was trying to pioneer this whole situation, but now it's transitioning into something else, and there's not that kind of like ability to make millions at the moment. So I'm still doing that, and the comic's coming out as a physical comic July 31st. So I'm going back into more kind of physical stuff. There's a company called Rules International who do the trading cards, physical trading cards. So I have 3 years work on an IP called Fear City, which is originally the NFT project. So that I want to adapt into more of a Web2 animation gaming. And I've written a load of stories about the characters. There's a whole, it's probably a 300-page deck now of characters and stories and the lore of the city. And I'm started designing the backgrounds, the environments of the city. So we'll see how that goes. So that's been the biggest project I've done in the past few years.
There's lots I want to ask about it, which I'm going to get into in a minute. But one thing that jumped out there, and it is something I experience also and see it common, but it's the life cycle of a project. From you mentioning about the ripped posters in it, I think I've become more at peace with that as time's gone on. I used to get guilt when I had to hang up a project, almost feeling like I was in some way giving it over for the wrong reasons, or wussing out, for want of a better term. But you look back and everything's very finite. Some things could last a week, but they're still important. I think they're still important to get you onto the next link of the chain and to feed that next idea.
Yeah.
Even there within the range of formats within the Fear City project that you talked about, and the kind of need to go through that process of feeling that it was serving an existing audience that was only, probably in its advent, given how new NFTs were. Seems almost slightly naive to think, well, it's guys who are buying it, so we'll keep serving the guys. It's almost like, no, let's be a pioneer and do something cool with it while there's still this relatively blank canvas going on around it.
Yeah. I think maybe, see, what led me to do the rip poster collages, and just so, people don't know them, but around New York, there's there's loads of building sites and hoardings around the building sites. Every day there's new layers of kind of advertising posters that are posted up illegally, and people walk along the street and they'll rip them down, or they'll write a slogan on them, or they'll spray a tag, or just crazy little messages sometimes, or stickers. And if an area of New York hasn't been touched for a while, the wall, the hoarding will be just this organic, it'd just be growing like a rose bush or something, but with kind of weird kind of like street culture. And then the weather comes down and then weakens the glue, and the poster starts flipping down. And then you got layers and layers of all these old kind of like graphics from past 5 years that layered over each other of advertising posters. And if I cut into that with a knife, you can pull out various kind of shapes of characters and faces of models and typefaces and fonts and slogans, and it just would build up and cut into them and then paint my more figurative cartoons on top. So that's what I was doing up to that point. When I was my last few months at Rockstar, I would be going to work and be taking photographs of like close-ups of these walls, because all over New York it's just like plastered with stickers and slogans and lost, like unicorn lost, and then little tabs you rip off to report that they, if you've seen the lost unicorn, crazy stuff like that. And I did a TED talk on it called The Power of the Palimpsest. So a friend one day said to me, "Oh, you're making palimpsests," and I didn't know what that meant. And it's basically layers of paper or images that are layered over, like the paper's reused. Back in the days when there was papyrus to write onto, it was so expensive that the monks would kind of rub off whatever image had painted or drawn onto it, and then write over the top, and you'd still see the ghost image of the underlying image or writing. So it was, in that way, it was kind of a palimpsest. So I did this TED talk about it. And I think it was, I really loved it. It gave purpose to walking around New York. It was kind of almost like a therapy to do that. And I think because I'd spent 16 years at Rockstar purely doing figurative art, and I did a lot of kind of lifestyle, Monty Python-esque lifestyle pop art that was nothing to do with gaming. But I think that doing mainly figurative work for a purpose of selling something, I had to go out and do something that was non-figurative and just pure kind of color and shape, and it's some kind of exorcism was going on there. So I think I got that out of my system, and I may start it up again. There was a point. This sounds weird, but Shepard Fairey, actually, I went to show him my work at his studio, my palimpsests, and he's like, "Will you do this with my work?" and sent me a whole bunch of his screen prints. And I started ripping them up, which was weird, ripping up kind of limited edition Shepherd Fairies and placing them with my images. And I did 4 big canvases like that, but nothing ever came of that. And that wasn't one of the nails in the coffin of that work, because I'd spent so much time doing that for not big feedback. Maybe I set my heights too high. I don't know.
It strikes me as a really personal, like you said, an exorcism there, almost strikes me as a blast of emotional creativity as opposed to intellectual creativity. So then when it becomes a brief with an external artist, it almost feels like it loses something of what made it unique and short term.
Yeah. But I got some really good projects going on at the moment. I mean, I'm talking about taking time off to actually look after my state of mind. I've got so much work, I'm not even sure if I can do that, but I'm going to have to, as you say, be more kind of like sensible about the way I work. What have I got going on? NFTs for Australian company. And I've been working for DC Comics, which is a big thing for me, because I draw because DC Comics and Marvel. I was a kid, I would copy DC Marvel comics and Jack Kirby and in fact, if you look at some of my early work, it was very Grand Theft Auto in the fact that it was structured like panels of concentrated focusing in on an image of a guy's head or kind of a car exploding. Or it was like when I was 10, I was almost, that was the root of the Grand Theft Auto style. I feel that's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah.
So to actually, I mean, it took way too long to get to do DC covers. But I did. It's an issue. It's a thing called Absolute Powers. A series called Absolute Powers, and there's a character called Amanda Waller who's got these android characters that are stealing the powers of the Justice League America, and it's been a lot of fun doing that. And I get to do and I'm doing the 5th one, which will be Batman. So awesome. that's pretty amazing. Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm very interested in the narrative origin of Fear City, because these characters, I'm in love with them. I think there's such, to me, as a viewer, there's something very contemporary and very tangible in my everyday life that I see in society at large, in the way the world's sat just now. Is there any conscious recognition of anything along those lines? Like, tell me about the origin of these characters in this world that you've created.
It all stems from like the cultural references growing up from the 70s. So there's Starsky and Hutch is the root of Heaven and Hell, who are 2 female cops, both glamorous, like Charlie's Angels. They're female Starsky and Hutch. And one is corrupt and a little bit jaded, and the other one is a sophomore, kind of like straight out police academy, obeys all the rules. So you got the conflict of those two, and their arc being that one becomes more aware of the rules and the other one slightly takes on, not corrupted, but she modifies her obeyance of the rules, realizes that maybe obeying the rules is such a great thing. So got that conflict going on, and those are going to be the 2 next comics that I do. And I've written 48 pages, but they're not good enough yet. I've got to edit them. And part of the Fear City NFT project was that a couple of our community members won a competition that they got to write the comics with me. So every Tuesday we would meet, and we've written the comics together. So at the moment I'm editing and working on those. And as I said, I've got the Thumper comic coming out July 31st, but that guy is the most popular of all the NFTs. People love the rabbit because he looks so crazy, and his father's a Italian overlord. He's maybe the most powerful man in Fear City, and there's a possessed mask that this boy wears, and he goes out with his katana and starts killing off criminals. And then the possessed mask takes over this teenager and gives him so much strength and power and intelligence that the violence becomes indiscriminate, and only his father can save Fear City from the wrath of this kid, his son. And that character came from all those freaky Easter Bunny photographs from the past, the 1940s onwards. You know the ones?
I do know the ones, yeah.
God knows who was making the mask in the local village, but the things are terrifying. And there's a whole bunch of them where the kids are screaming in terror, and you kind of like looks like a kind of like a serial killer in a rabbit mask. And it's funny because throughout the 70s, there's not a lot of kids crying. They're kind of like whatever. And then the more you get on into the 90s, the more they're getting soft and the kids are crying. And it's like, I don't know if it's true, but for me, it was kind of like a little bit like kids are getting softer over the decades. If you go online and Google, Easter Bunny Christmas photographs, you'll see what I'm talking about. So we were tougher in the 70s.
Well, yeah, I mean, on a totally different level, there's this thing that I used to follow where somebody used to run a tournament, and it was footballers aging badly, particularly kind of around the 80s. And the guys who were 32 then looked about 70, whereas the 32-year-old footballer now is supermodel. It's hilarious, but it kind of reflects that sentiment.
Well, yeah, you'd have George Best and Jackie Charlton in the 70s drinking a pint of beer at halftime.
Yeah.
George Best would always play with a hangover, and he was a genius,
Mm-hmm.
They were just street kids who were good at playing football because that's all they had to do. And then it became way more professional, in the 90s and 2000s. But yeah, so Fear City is everything I've ever been interested in growing up. Warriors, the movie Warriors, that's the Warriors, Starsky and Hutch, Charlie's Angels probably would be the three root influences for Fear City, and of course Gotham as well. And I'm starting to introduce crap superheroes into the city. Inevitably I had to do that because it all was getting a little bit straight. I always wanted to be somehow detached with some kind of reality. And I read this book called Save the Cat. Do you know Save the Cat? Which is a screenwriter's book. I wanted to learn how to write a comic strip based on, professional screenwriting kind of rhythm of the hero's arc. And Save the Cat refers to every movie has to have a Save the Cat moment where you learn to love the protagonist because he does something that is giving, like he saves a cat from a tree. And then you empathize with the main guy,
Mm-hmm.
So I've been learning. We would study that book together when I was writing it with two community members. I made them buy that book, and we all read it together and learned how to write properly. I'm not sure if it's sunk in enough. I didn't need to read it another 10 times, but it's a great book.
I also recommend Into the Woods by John York, along similar lines. He also writes for screen and TV, a lot of big things on his CV, but it's great. It's all about why, how stories are told and why we tell them, and similar thing, but a very great book. Recommend that one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm always wanting to learn more because one of my things that I'm kind of like, I feel like I set my sights too high, and I'm always comparing myself to way bigger artists and judge myself as well. I'm not there yet, so I kind of like get down on myself, and it's not a good way to live. And I'm trying to think now, what will set me apart from gallery artists that I look up to? I'll probably never get to their level. What will set me apart from NFT artists who? And it's this book I've been writing for a long time about my experience in Japan in the 1980s when I was a model over there. And I ended up getting a job as a fashion designer with a company called Hysteric Glamour. But I went there to do fashion shows. I had long hair and I did pretty well, and ended up staying in Japan because it was this fantastic, fun bubble in the middle of the 80s, and earn enough money from 1 or 2 jobs every week to party every night. But along the way, there was a lot of kind of like stupidity and kind of privilege and breaking a lot of rules and meeting a lot of, like people messing with the mafia. And So I have a whole collection of stories from back then, and I'm trying to write that right now because I think it's the only thing that could set me apart is to have the book, which I've called Poser, because I've always been a poser ever since I was a kid. I'd always like dress up and be a bit of a ponce like that. Yeah, so that's what I mean. Right, I got an artist called Alessia DeCio in Italy who drew my whole Thumper comic, and she's ready. I know that she can draw anything that I imagined. She's an incredible artist, and I want to show Japan in the 80s visually, you know, from the like aerial views and down in Roppongi and the club districts and the style of all the people that lived there and the models and, you know, and the inside the clubs. And I'm hoping that will become something. I mean, I'm using, you know, the books that have become, the graphic novels that have become big in the past 20 years as an inspiration for that. I want to take it to, you know, big publishers as opposed to trying to get an underground comic publisher. So that's my main kind of like side project I'm working on at the moment.
That sounds fantastic. I'm intrigued. That sounds really good because like you said, just culturally at that time, Japan, but also that world within it, those subcultures. That sounds really intriguing to me. I think that'll attract interest.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a 40-page, I don't know what you call it, a demo book of it with fully fleshed out chapters, and then the list of all the chapters, the overview of what the whole book would be about. And I had an agent in England who sent it out to a few publishers, and they rejected it. And I was happy to have rejection letters, kind of, you know, at least it was a first step. But then I read it recently again, and I thought this just isn't good enough, and it could be a lot better. And then I thought I should write as a David Starris style diary, because David Starris is hilarious, and all he's reading about is his family going on holiday when they're kids and looking at turtles. But he's hilarious, and I was thinking, I started writing it as a diary, doing the same thing. And you can express emotions within a diary as opposed to being a Hemingway, where you're kind of describing an environment, which I'm just not good enough to do. And then I thought, comic book, that's the thing to do it. Alessia DeCio, she could do this. She can draw this exactly how I want it. And then, yes, they realized it should be a combination of diary and comic book.
It's a great idea.
So it's
perfect.
Yeah, it's I want to make it funny. I want to make it, because there's a lot of tragedy in it as well. A lot of people really fucked up over there. And as inevitably, it was like there was the eventual Altamont moment when one of our very good friends died. And it was, you know, I don't even know if I'll mention that in the comic book, but it was like inevitably, when there's so much fun going on and decadence, there's going to be a conclusion that's not going to be positive. I mean, when referring to Altamont, you know, that was kind of the end of the hippie period. You know, the peace and love ended with the Hells Angels beating up, killing a guy in the crowd at a Rolling Stones concert, you know.
Yeah, it's almost like some sort of dark equilibrium that happens.
Yeah.
Almost, yeah. An interesting line of inquiry. How much of you is in these Fear City characters? And obviously, I'm not speaking literally to the darkness there, but do you create with, you know, do you channel aspects, lived experience, or is this a kind of external thing for you? Because I personally love, you know, I write quite a lot of short fiction in my own time. This series called Stories for the Apocalypse, and I use it to write through my insurmountables, but also it's my lived, observed experience. None of them is overtly about me. I'm not doing any of the ridiculous and dark things that my characters do, but it's very much social commentary through the lens of short, dark comedy fiction. And I adore that process. I love to pull that in and use it in this way that's quite protected, as, you know, not obviously being Ben Talon, but I'm very much in there. Is there anything along those lines of you in Fear City?
I wrote it with a guy called Malcolm Wong, used to be my agent in Japan for illustration, and he wrote a lot of socio-political reasons for why Fear City had become it was based on 1970s New York, when New York was bankrupt. So he introduced that political socio reason for the city to crumbling. But I rewrote it. That was for the NFT comic, and over the next year of that being released, I rewrote a lot of the dialogue with one of the editors at Scout Comics who are publishing it, and started introducing it, my own personality into it. So the conflict between the two female cops, you know, the good, the heaven and hell, the good and evil, they would have like dialogues where they're taking the piss out of each other. And that was very much like the English pub culture of kind of like, you know, you just take the piss out of each other. You're kind of like, it's kind of a witty kind of banter. So I thought, and that happens quite a few times that when I rewrote the comic, I'm not a political person really. I can moan about Trump or whatever, but I'm not someone who puts anything political into my work. And I don't even think I express my feelings in my work, which was maybe was missing from the palimpsest. But I think what I'm best at is humor, you know, humor and darkness. And that comes from, I think, being English and just being my natural personality. I mean, the English thing is darkness and humor, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And then people misinterpret that when they meet English people sometimes, like they're unfriendly or whatever, but it's just a form of honesty. And then the humor comes out. I don't know why, but you know, English people are really funny, you know, and it's very easy to misunderstand. But I'm happy I have those elements. And I always thought that Fear City was a culmination of all the misery and darkness I felt that my whole life was now being expressed into the comic and the stories and IP. And it was almost like there was a use for it. Like if I was feeling a bit mental one day and down, well, it would lead to some kind of like humorous way of perceiving a situation. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a survival instinct and also just something we've always grown up with. So I was really happy about that. I was like, wow, I'm never going to be miserable at parties. I'm going to be miserable at parties in the future, but I'm going to be really happy about being miserable because it's going to means that it had a purpose and I'm making money from it. You know, that was my thinking. Mm-hmm. And then it didn't sell as well as I wanted. And I'm like, fuck, it just means I'm miserable. But anyway, I got a way to go with the IP and it's really fleshed out and you know, I'm proud of it, but I just need someone I have met people with a vision to put money into it, but they're full of bollocks. They're like, yeah, it's not a case of when we give you the money, it's a case of how much. So we'll get back to you, tumbleweeds, you know. I'm just hoping I meet someone with a vision who can actually see through with how Fear City can be made into something that can make money, you know, and develop as an animation, a video game. It's all in there.
I mean, just when I look, I only have to look at the character, the images to see that sprawling out. You know, perhaps that's because I'm from the same world as you, where our vision is our kind of currency in our profession. But my God, there's so much scope there. You know, it makes me hungry for more of it. You know, you say, yeah, I see it. I mean, whether you even are interested in going down the video game route again, but I can see scope for that. I see scope for, like you said, animation, shorts, feature. You know, there's even prose. It's even got my cogs turning in terms of prose. You know, there's really real layers there, and so I hope you do find that person because I really think it's there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that gives me a lot of encouragement.
It's funny what you say about the English cynicism thing as well, because I've got some friends who are just so good at that. And if you don't know them, even for other English people, if you don't know them, they can be so cutting. But I wrote this short story in a collection I've yet to release. And it was about a friend, you know, witnessing an actual murder. It was the beginning of a mass shooting in this English countryside going back about 5-6 years. And this sums him up to a T, because I remember getting the phone call. And very weirdly, there was a succession of phone calls that week. And this was at a time when I'd started university, still living at home with my parents. He was working as an electrician. And we'd speak 2-3 times a day on lunch breaks and breaks, just silly chit chat as you did, you know, used to do back then. And I remember him calling me, and the first story was I've just been trapped by a herd of cows in this field while I'm working on a pylon. And then the next one was, I've been locked in a basement. All these sort of weird, just little happenings. And then the fourth call, I'll never forget it. He rang me and he said, "I think I've just seen someone get shot in the face." And after those calls, this was like, whoa, 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 what? And what he'd witnessed was the start of, I think, about 7, 8 people. This guy who's taxi driver who'd kind of gone off a cliff and gone and shot a load of people. So naturally, I was concerned about him. Made sure he got home that day. And then the Sunday, I remember calling him just to check in and make sure he was all right, because I know people can have delayed reactions to shock. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, the murder you just saw the other day." And he said, don't let mass murders bring me down a peg or two. And I just remember thinking, that's the most cynical, sort of dry version of you, that you have to know you to get that. But that is a very English thing. Yeah. So I love that.
Well, it's also the Churchill war spirit of, like, grin and bear it, keep calm and carry on, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I reason that there's not many therapists in England or in Britain. People just don't do that. They have to kind of, like, I guess that's where we translate it into humor, but or cynicism. Well, cynicism, it can be humorous, but yeah, it's like grin and bear it.
Well, I think part of the reason I see such a sprawling possibility for Fear City is because that's tangible to me. What's lovely, and I just finished reading Rick Rubin's book, and he talks about that the wonderful thing of the lack of ownership over our own work once it's completed and it's out in the world, and how that then becomes the viewer their own interpretation. So me looking at your work is probably entirely disconnected on many levels from what you intended or what you even created. But actually, it's kind of, I pick up themes within that, that maybe are not even sort of aware to the creator, but there is so much depth there. It's kind of partly with the color palettes, partly stylistic, but then there's such identity and such extremity to each of these characters. But then most importantly, that undercurrent of English kind of cynicism and almost, this has gone really horribly wrong, but we're still laughing through it. That's there.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes me want to see more of this kind of fucked up universe where people are sort of maniacally cackling their way through it,
Yeah, well, that's very encouraging indeed. And I'm glad you see stuff that I probably don't see as well, because I always hope that even with my fine art, like, I could never really conceive of what was the depth, the concept in my fine art, and always hope that someone else could,
Yeah.
So that's good to know.
But then, yeah, that's another thing that he talks about in the book, is about the kind of the very fact that we are creating and how we create, kind of the work will speak to that, and we don't always necessarily need to know that. It kind of lives within it, and that's the part of the beauty of it. It's interesting. You can get into so many.
Yeah, I have that one on audiobook, but I haven't listened to it yet. I'm still irritated by Rick Rubin's production style, and I hope Rick Rubin never listens to this, but I just feel like he turns up in the studio and he's like, "Well, just play it," and that's great, and then walks away with $10 million. And I could be completely wrong, but obviously his early hip hop work was incredible. But anyway, that's my slight take on Rick Rubin.
I must admit, I'm very late to even being aware of him. So I'm on the music front, I'm very naive, almost no knowledge. But this book sort of landed in my life along with a number of others while writing my own book, and it's blown me away somewhat. I think it's tapped into where I am myself at the moment. Just those serendipitous timings. But yeah,
it's very inspiring that he meditates, and he's a spiritual person now, and is at a kind of an age where he doesn't need to get fucked up. He's very inspiring in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to listen to that book and get inspired from it.
Yeah. So what's the hope for the comic in terms of, is there a conversation between you and the publisher in terms of, we want it to do this, or is it a kind of, let's put it out and see what happens?
One of the reasons Scout make comics, and I don't know exactly what the law is on copyright, but if remembering loosely, if you write a screenplay for a movie, you could be given like 50 grand and they just push you out of the studio, and you'd have no kind of like real rights to if they rewrite it. But if you make a comic book of that script, because you've got a visual representation of the script, it then becomes much harder for a studio to, just push you out of the way and pay a minimal amount of money. So they also are an agency for movies. And I know one guy, I can't remember, I don't know what film it was, but he did comics and he left. He was one of the main guys at Scout. So I'm hoping that Thumper will translate into something much bigger than a comic and have that basis for the fact that I have to be kept around as the owner of the intellectual property and have some kind of say in how the script is written. So that's the big ambition for it. Otherwise, it's I'm really pleased that comics have been such a big influence on my life and my style, especially like underground 60s comics, Robert Crumb and Robert Williams, and those, the psychedelic comics. And then in the 80s, there was Art Spiegelman's Raw comic and all those beautiful Charles Burns comics and Mark Merrick and Kaz. So they've always been such a big influence. And this is the first time in my life I got my own comic out that I put together, and it's taken like 2 years to go from the NFT to the physical comic. So it's an achievement in that way, but I want something much bigger to come from it. And it's the first, apart from all the stuff I did with merch with Jeff Staple and the NFTs and the art drops I've done, it's the first kind of recognized solid representation of my characters that people can digest from that storyline and know what's going on. It's become something real other than a kind of like something floating around on the internet in Web3.
I'd love to see that film. I think it'd be tremendous. There again, there's the richness of the characters and the scope within that would be incredible. And if that happened, I would hope to see as part of the PR you're doing full wall murals of those characters, because that would be pretty daunting in the city.
We had Insa paint. Insa, the muralist. He actually painted a mural for us in New York, and it was an animated GIF mural. So when you hold up, I think it might be his app, you hold up your telephone to the mural, the typography kind of revolves and a pigeon comes out of the picture and flies away over your shoulder. And it was a DJ with one of the cops, female cops, with DJ, and the record was turning, and it was really beautiful, kind of like GIF from a static image on a wall. He's a very, very clever guy.
That sounds fantastic.
So when I looked at what we had achieved in a year or even 2 years with Fear City, it was pretty incredible, because time is different in Web3. The kids are kind of expecting everything to be so fast, and brands, you have to establish your brand in 4 weeks or kids start moaning. And I've had brands before coming to work for Rockstar. I had a brand called Steroid, and back then we used to say you have 4 years to establish a brand. You have to work for no money for 4 years and before you establish a kind of Stussy-esque label, But in Web3, it was had to be almost immediately that you were, making money from it and earning money for the community. And NFTs are about the community joining together because they're interested in an artist or a musician, but also getting things back like competitions and T-shirts and parties, and if you have enough money, and you're always giving back to the community, but you have an instant kind of audience for your artwork. I can't remember where I was going with that, but
something that's grabbed me though from what you said there, and this is something I alluded to earlier within the work, and it's just something that I read from it, but there's something about at least some of the teenagers I see today, and I would never just judge an entire generation, of course, but there's a certain type of teenager that sort of immediacy and that kind of sense of now. It's I see it in the kind of street culture around. It's like out on my morning dog walk, I'll find these sweet packets around the park benches. It's like our generation was likely to be drinking white cider or Mad Dog 2020 and smoking in a park.
Yeah.
Whereas today's generation, it's almost like sweet overload, and that creates this. And I find these sweets I didn't even know existed anymore around, the packets, neon colors and quite brash. And that sort of psychology and I don't know whether it's part of the sort of COVID generation. They call it the ghost generation of kids who missed out on such a fundamental part of their socializing and their development because of this horrible situation of being locked indoors. Maybe that's got something to do with it. Maybe there's many things, but it's just something within that I see, that I pick up on in these works, and this kind of almost this paranoia and this kind of directionlessness that I pick up from in Fear City. It's just my own take, but it's
Right.
there's something interesting.
You sure they're not marijuana edibles? Have you seen those?
I haven't seen any out in the streets, but no.
Yeah, I mean, they're everywhere in New York now. Those stores selling every brand, like fizzy drinks and tea bags and coffee. Everything has marijuana in it, and just regular gummy bears with like cartoons on the packet. Everywhere. It's crazy. So I think kids are more likely to be vaping and taking edibles than getting drunk.
Yeah, that's very true. Well, there we go. Well, I've covered most things. This has been a pleasure as ever, and I'm very excited to see where this goes. I'd love to be. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be keeping a keen eye. I'm very excited. And is the comic going to be available in the UK? Or?
Well, best is to order it from Scout Comics. It's just scoutcomics.com, and then you enter in Thumper into the search, and Bob's Your Uncle. So that's coming out July 31st. And there's a lot of nice merch, Fear City merch on there as well, beer glasses and stuff. And then guess I'll have to spend another 2 years doing the next comic. I mean, I'm definitely not going to do an NFT comic again, but I'll definitely going to be doing physicals.
Yeah. Well, if anybody comes into my world that, I should introduce in regards of seeing it as a bigger thing, then I will certainly connect you, because I'd really love to see that happen.
Yeah. Thanks for your support, Ben.
No, my pleasure. Yeah, no, you too. And good luck with it all, and keep in touch.
All right. Take care.
All right, Stephen. Take care, mate. Bye-bye.
Good. Bye.
Huge thank you to Stephen for taking the time to talk during the launch week of his Thumper comic coming out on Scout Comics. It's going to be awesome. I've got the digital previews, but you just can't compare getting your hands on a lovely physical comic with all that beautiful writing and art and everything that goes into such an underappreciated art form, if I'm honest. I think it deserves even more recognition for the sheer craft and storytelling and cultural identity that we get through comics, and whether they're indie comics, DC stuff, as Stephen mentioned there, living that little dream, or, your proper kind of one-offs by little artists. I used to go to Magma Comics in Manchester before it very sadly closed down, and pick up Tom Gold Comics, who now works with the likes of The Guardian and does much bigger publications. But the likes of Guardians of the Kingdom, his early works were just, I loved them so much, really inspiring. And I got to hear Tom talk during the third year of my degree at UCLan on the illustration course, and it was a game changer for me, because there was a real human sitting opposite me who was doing what I was dreaming of doing, yet felt so far away and out of reach. So I loved that, and I still get that pleasure all the time from talking to the guests here on The Creative Condition, Stephen very much included in that. It's such an honour to sit under the learning tree of these people who are so good at what they do, and I will forever be doing it in some capacity. So thank you for the support, guys, and listening. Please do keep coming back. We've got some awesome episode coming up. Leave us a little rating, review, and subscription. It really helps to support the show for free. Coming up on 50 reviews on Apple Podcasts now, so nudge me over the line if you haven't done that already. Coaching coming up, announcements about that in the not too distant future. We're working on it behind the scenes. The book is out now, 380 whopping pages, a biography of creativity, written the way that I talk. bentalonwriter.com/shop, or Kindle stores out now. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, illustrationx.com, constant supporter of everything that I'm doing here. They do a brilliant newsletter called TrendX where they report in from the front line of the illustration game. Go and check that out too. What else? That's about it from me. Ukrainian Institute also, ui.org.ua. Have a wonderful week, guys. Enjoy the Olympics. Get inspired. Go back and listen to episodes of Alex Pask and Ben Ryan if you haven't already, and enjoy these episodes of Stephen. This is also available in highlights form now on the podcast page. Cheers, guys. Love you all. Take care.